Welcome back, sirs and madams. Today we continue with February. Yeah, I know it's March, but it's the spirit of the season, right? No? Well, too bad. But first, a look back at our last installment. Donkey Kong Country, classic side-scrolling platformer with groundbreaking pre-rendered 3D graphics with a mostly cohesive aesthetic that really only falls apart once or twice, jam-packed with challenging but fun levels, never straying too far away from a winning formula of level-based play largely without augmenting the basics of gameplay. Often hailed as one of the finest SNES games, and herald of a beautiful friendship between Rare and Nintendo, which of course was cut short altogether too soon. Anyways, with all that success in terms of design, player reception, and critical acclaim, clearly a sequel was in the works, we all thought. These theories proved founded when the very next year, no less, Donkey Kong Country Diddy Kong's Quest appeared on store shelves and... wait a minute, the apostrophe S is there? Diddy's Kong Quest? Oh, ha 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 ha! Wordplay. So yeah, you all know that I loved Donkey Kong Country when it came out, and still do to this day. But what of the second game, the middle child of the series, if you will? I've gone on record in the past as saying that sequels, especially back in the good old days, were engineered largely to attempt to recapture the feeling and the appeal of the original. There will of course be new characters, new environments, a few new mechanics here and there, but ultimately the spirit of the original game will be in there to varying degrees. Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, still kind of getting used to that, is most certainly that. It has the same graphics, the same basic gameplay, the same basic premise. There is an object of desire at the end of your quest, in this case a kidnapped Donkey Kong, so run, jump, swim, and fly to the right to go rescue him. What is noticeably different in this game is the atmosphere and aesthetic, and I know I talk a lot about those things, but I honestly think they're important, especially for a game like this, with next to no story and virtually no dialogue. Donkey Kong Country conveyed so much story and meaning through just its environments, and most importantly, how those environments were arranged. What's most interesting is that Donkey Kong Country 2 essentially tosses all of that out the window and smears its atmosphere all over the canvas and calls it a paycheck. But seriously, while DKC had an environmental approach that seemed calculated and cohesive, which is like my new favorite word apparently, DKC 2 is all over the damn place, and yet it accomplishes just as much. The game begins on the deck of a pirate ship, a stage that is set beautifully for us by the end of the first game. See? I told you we'd get to that next time. This time. Whatever. Everything about this first handful of levels implies adventure. Like, I know that the ship is run aground the whole time you're in this area, but nuts to that, I like to think these levels are Diddy and Dixie commandeering the ship and sailing it back to Crocodile Isle, having to put up with hostile ship crew members along the way. Like, I love the idea of Lockjaw's locker being the night when the ship hit a rock and they had to go repair a hole in the hull. Okay, so that's me reading a bit too much into it, but regardless of my inane ramblings, the ship world area thing really is the perfect way to set this game off. It single-handedly does what Donkey Kong Country spent an entire game doing. The first game was a progressive adventure, slowly moving further and further away from home into darker or more oppressive environments, but the ship in Diddy's Kong Quest lets us know right up front that we are nowhere near home. You can even see DK Isle in the background of the level. That is home back there. What we're doing here is an adventure all on its own. The game very obviously wants you to know that here there be dragons, or reptiles anyways. Diddy and Dixie have no idea what to expect, and nor should they. Volcanoes, twisted theme parks, haunted forests, mountaintop fortresses. Who could have expected this? Who could feel comfortable here? The enemy. That's who. Yes, everything about this game's environment, from the moment you step into Creme Cauldron to the view atop K. Rool's keep, spells unfamiliarity. Like, the scariest thing we had to deal with in the first game was a polluted valley. Or Gorilla Glacier, you know, if you're scared of heights or whatever. First world after you get off the ship, volcano. No big deal, just another day on Crocodile Isle. There is almost zero connection between them either. What logical conclusion do we have to move from a swamp into an amusement park, or from that into a haunted forest? The progression in this game is jarring, and the environments after you get off the ship are almost always dark and foreboding, with perhaps the exception of the beehive levels and the ice caves, which are just threatening in of themselves. This game wants you to feel like you're behind enemy lines, like you don't belong here. Even the music over the level select screen is tense and worrying. In fact, the music overall is a far cry from what we had in the first game. The first game's score consisted of largely ambient, usually quiet, minimalistic tunes, reflecting the current environment you found yourself in. Distant water droplets in a cave reflected by light, airy drums, thick yet fluid tones that can only force you to picture the seaweed swaying along with them, menacing industrial fanfare accompanying a foreign, well, industrial landscape. All of it setting the mood perfectly without announcing itself to you, never really sticking in your mind. DKC2, on the other hand, goes for broke on some of the most memorable tunes I have heard in a video game ever. From swinging sea shanties, to chilling, intimidating marches, to suspenseful chase scenes, a lot of what's here does a great job of reinforcing the whole in the belly of the beast motif that the game is based around. As such, I feel as though it's almost wrong to compare the two soundtracks, unless you're trying to point out how different they are. The songs in DKC2 are objectively stronger in that they closer fit the definition of actual songs. Seriously, I bought the soundtrack CD when I was a kid, which I just so happened to not be able to find at the moment. Sorry. But I used to listen to that thing all the time, which is notable because sometimes having music that stands out can be a detriment to building an atmosphere. If you've got the player thinking about the music specifically, then you're separating it from the overall experience. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, you just then have the music serving a different purpose, perhaps emphasizing emotional development or illustrating the action on screen rather than building the environment. Donkey Kong Country 2, however, manages to be both functional and memorable. It manages to set tone and mood perfectly, while still contributing to the raw experience of the game. The gameplay in Diddy's Conquest is more or less the same approach as the first game. Some aspects of the gameplay were changed, such as steel barrel riding being removed, although I barely used it in the first game anyways, and neither of the protagonist characters are able to take down large enemies, like Donkey was able to. They have maintained the calculated imbalance between player characters though. They hold carried objects in different positions analogous to the first game, and Diddy can run faster while Dixie has the ability to helicopter twirl her ponytail, making her descend through the air at a constant yet lowered velocity. Yes, this is still as broken as it seemed when you were a kid. I honestly couldn't find any real advantage to playing as Diddy over Dixie, but during this playthrough of the game, I did actually find that I didn't favor either of the Kongs, and that while the helicopter twirl is a huge advantage, I didn't depend on it nearly as much as I did when I was a kid, and that the levels never actually require you to use it. The level design went in all kinds of new directions in this game, and I mean that literally. In Donkey Kong Country, you were almost exclusively moving to the right, occasionally ascending or descending in elevation. In Donkey Kong Country 2, there were levels that had you climbing up towards your goal, descending into the unknown, or even navigating aerial mazes with healthy doses of death painted on the walls. To facilitate this, the game used old mechanics like the cannon barrels, and added new things like hooks for the Kongs to hang from, animal buddies like Squitter and the two variations of Squawks, and in some levels, honey, which was smeared on the wall that allowed you to engage in one of the most thumb-destroying activities ever found in a video game. Vertical levels in platforming games can often be difficult and frustrating because, you know, gravity's kind of insistent, but these vertical levels were handled beautifully, rarely leaving you wondering where to go next, and designed in such a way that most of the time you're not liable to lose all of your progress should you fall, but sometimes, One of the major ways they overhauled level design in DKC2 was the way they used the animal buddies. Two new features were added to the mechanic overall, other than the two newbies who replaced some of the old guard. These were the no animal signs and the animal barrels. In my last video, I talked about how the animal buddies in Donkey Kong Country were used primarily for exploration, with their associated power-ups being mostly a welcome side effect. In this game, the animal buddies are quite literally limited to the specific area of the level they're found in. Within this cross-section of the level are not only situations that are simplified by each assistant's unique abilities, but also secrets that are accessible only by the same. So the no animal signs are essentially telling us that there is no need for your animal companion anymore. You either found everything or you missed it. Nice going. The animal barrels, on the other hand, allowed the player to play as a particular animal buddy directly, without having to worry about losing them due to an accident. The developers were then free to design entire levels specifically designed for that animal buddy, allowing for expansion on the game's level design. These expanded level concepts added all kinds of new opportunities for exploration, which were driven almost entirely by the promise of collectibles. Just like last time, there are plenty of bonus rooms to locate and complete, but here we can really start to see Rare toying around with the concept of a collectathon. A swear word to some, but truly a tantalizing term if ever there was one to others. I fall in the latter category. I love collectathons. In Diddy's Conquest, the Kongs find themselves coming across old favorites as well as banana tokens, creme coins, and the illustrious and sought-after DK coins, all of which serve different purposes. The tokens allow you to buy hints, transports, and access to quiz games that give you rewards and extra lives. The creme coins serve as the singular reward for all of the bonus levels in the game, and are used to buy access to the game's optional levels in the Lost World. And then, of course, there are the DK coins, collectibles with no value except for the fact that you can collect them. Seriously, the only reason you want to collect these things is because Cranky basically dared you to go find them. Cranky Kong, you marketing genius, you're a regular P.T. Barnum, you are! In many ways, Diddy's Conquest was an expansion on its predecessor. New level design concepts and the hidden items to collect made the game feel so much bigger, despite the fact that the games are pretty much the same size. Even the bosses were more complex. The first game was just big versions of enemies that you had to throw things at or jump on, but in Donkey Kong Country 2, you still threw stuff at them, but their arenas were more complex, and the bosses themselves weren't fooling around. Multi-stage fights, multiple forms of attack, and talk about tough. I still have trouble with King Zing. But in all of this, DKC2 seems to be pulling away from a lot of the simplicity of the first game. The animal barrels in particular changed the nature of the game significantly. Suddenly, the player is expected to become familiar with new states of play in order to find all of the collectibles or even to progress through the game. In Donkey Kong Country, you could walk into any level and know that you will be able to reach the end of that level with all of the abilities you have walking in. In this game, however, some levels are designed around the special abilities you only get on occasion. The DK coins add a tangible element of accomplishment beyond that of just finishing the game. The Lost World could even be considered the original DLC no one asked for. Okay, that might be a bit much, but it's no stretch of the imagination to see that this game has bigger and better goals than the first game. Simplicity is the first victim of scope, and it can make this game feel kind of unwieldy and less cohesive overall, the perfect example of which being the color-based status effects the final boss can inflict on you. It's something that, as far as I could find, we don't see up until this point in the game. Literally adding new elements to think about at the very end of the game. But these things don't make it a bad game by any means. In the end, they all play nicely into the challenge of the game. This game overall is noticeably difficult. I might even go so far as to say it's hard. Like, really hard. Only 2 wines though, because, you know, it's not Dark Souls or anything, but seriously, this game certainly throws a few more punches than the first game. Toxic Tower, Screech's Sprint, Gusty Glade, actually, you know, basically all of the Forest World area, not to mention the Lost World, but we'll get to that later. This is a game that certainly doesn't skimp on the difficulty curve. Like, seriously, they used to hide collectibles for that roll jump thing in the first game, but now you actually have to use them to get through some levels. While most of DKC is easily manageable with a few tries, DKC 2 will have you stressing out in a much more serious way. One time I reached the final world of the game, only to get game over looped on Screech's Sprint. You start your game with 5 lives, and they never last long with me because, well, I was really not on that weekend. 10 game overs later, and you still can't fly out to run through some old levels, build up some lives or coins yet because Funky's just sitting there waiting for you to make it out of that shitstorm of thorns they call a level. And if you can make it to the race portion of the level, well, good luck. You've probably got like 1 life left. Let's see how that goes. Every time bringing you back to the level select screen as though there were any other levels to select, just staring longingly at the final boss fight, which is right freaking there. And hey, when you think about it, where in this hell dimension I call Thornotopia did this level even come from anyways? We get to the top of K. Rool's Keep, a long, grueling journey to be sure, and finally at the end of it we come upon Donkey Kong tied up and waiting to be rescued. Suddenly, K. Rool jumps down and drags DK up into his flying machine with him being all, "Ha-ha, foiled again, Kongs." I imagine that's what his voice sounds like. The music is ominous and tense as K. Rool's flying machine descends upon the land and you spring into action once more, climbing towards the final fight, the ultimate challenge of this harrowing journey, a battle for the ages and musings for the bards. But first you gotta do this hard as dicks race level that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah, nice breakdown and theming, guys. All the tension is gone. Like, it's gone. It's just gone. When we finally do make it to K. Rool's airship, we're all like, hello, sorry we're late. Some bird stole our directions and we had to... Oh, now he's dressed like a pirate? Last game, on a pirate ship, no pirate costume. This time, he's on an airship and he's Ugh, what's he gonna be dressed as next time? A stewardess in a concert hall? Playing this boss again after so many years brought back a lot of memories. The fight with K. Rool in the first game, all things considered, pretty easy. I never really had a problem with him as a kid, and there's nothing really special going on here, so I didn't dwell on it in my last video. But the final fight in Diddy's Conquest, on the other hand, man, that felt good. He's got all kinds of different attacks and noticeably different stages of combat, and yeah, I know I was ragging on those status effects from earlier, but at this point, they're just another element to this really tough, really rewarding boss fight. I always had trouble with this guy as a young buck, and I'll admit, beating him this time around took a healthy amount of tries. Finishing this game again was every bit as satisfying as it was all those years ago, but of course I hadn't completed the game yet, or ever really. Simply doing battle with K. Rool is not the end of the game. DKC2 continues to prove just how epic it can be with 5 optional bonus levels and an even final boss fight. This is something I never actually did when I was young. Going into the Lost World with the aim of finishing it was kind of a thrill. And if you thought the rest of the game was hard, just wait until you get into the Lost World, because these levels are mostly more difficult. I mean, some of them aren't that bad, and I managed to finish the first 4 in about 45 minutes with a healthy amount of lives spent. The 5th and final one, however, yeesh, let's just be clear here. Squawks' section of animal antics more than makes up for any easiness you might have experienced up until now. Seriously. Oh, this can't be real. The wind, the candy-coated walls of death, the unkillable bees that are only this far apart. What sadistic creature nightmared up this oblivion-flavored descent into madness, then had such malicious will as to unleash it upon the world, devouring hopes and dreams and sanity as it relentlessly scours the mortal realm, never diverging from its unholy path of destruction? Oh, yeah, I finished it. And the rest of the level is pretty okay. And for the record, so is the rematch with K. Rool, so... yeah, it may sound like I'm unimpressed, but really, it was super cool to see more of this game I love so much. Like I said, I have never 102%ed this game, and finally doing so is pretty much an item off of my gaming bucket list. Donkey Kong Country 2 is without a doubt a classic. Beyond its favor with fans, there is certainly enough effort and polish here to warrant the goodwill and love that it has generated over nearly 2 decades of its existence. It's exciting, challenging, memorable, and even though it may have strayed away from some of the things I loved so much about the first game, this game definitely stands on its own and remains today as one of my favorite games on the SNES. So that's Donkey Kong Country 2. Yeah, I know last time I said it was pretty much the best game ever, but well, I was only sort of lying. It's definitely one of my favorites and has been for a long time. I'm so glad to finally be able to talk about it in this context. And stay tuned, because next time we head into largely unfamiliar territory. Yeah, I don't know Donkey Kong Country 3 all that well. So I guess we'll see what happens. Yeah. Hey everybody, thanks for watching my latest video. Click the links if you want to see more, and be sure to subscribe to stay updated on the release of future material. Also, be sure to like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter to witness the epic drama that is me trying to make one of these things. So until next time, keep watching the skies!